All right, we're back in the FITSNews studios after a very busy week. We were on the road in Walterboro, in Greer, all over the state, basically. But we've got a lot of great stories to tell you about this week. We're going to start with the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. Multiple updates in that case this week as we draw closer to the big trial in Walterboro, South Carolina, beginning on January 23rd. But we've also got an update on the Upstate Stalker story. Now, this is one that has attracted a lot of attention, not just in the Upstate, but across South Carolina, regarding an unknown text stalker who's been harassing literally dozens of women in the Upstate. We sat down with several of those women. We're going to start to tell their story on this show, with a bigger story coming next week. We've also got an update on the Cheer Incorporated scandal, particularly the latest lawsuit in Ohio. We sat down with Amy Gaffney, one of the newest attorneys on this case, who brings a wealth of employment and tort experience to this case, who really distilled this entire saga down to its essence. Stay tuned for that in this show as well. Last but certainly not least, we talked about the issue of sextortion. State Representative Brandon Guffey came into our studios this week to speak about his efforts to fix the laws in South Carolina in the aftermath of the tragic death of his son, Gavin, earlier this year. Gavin was a victim of one of these sextortion schemes. Stay tuned for that in this show as well. All this and much more coming your way on the Week in Review. All right, so we're starting this week with the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. It wasn't a hugely eventful week, but there were some developments this week in this case. We wanted to cover those real quickly before we moved on to other topics. The biggest development, news reported exclusively by this media outlet regarding the decision by Attorney General Alan Wilson not, I repeat, not, to seek the death penalty against Alec Murdaugh. Now, this was something, if you've been following this case, you knew it was coming. For a number of reasons. There's, first of all, the cost associated with these death penalty trials. They can run into the seven figures for taxpayers. That's obviously something that the Attorney General's got to think about as a politician, a politically elected office holder. You've also got the fact they're incredibly complicated. It's a whole new standard. Also resources that are available to the defense when the prosecution makes that notification that they are indeed seeking the death penalty. That opens up not only avenues on the front side in the trial process for the defense, but certainly on the appellate side. If you've ever followed how long folks stay on death row, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But here's the other point. In South Carolina, we're talking about death row. No one has been executed in South Carolina in nearly a dozen years. The last execution back in 2011 under former Governor Nikki Haley. The state has not executed anyone since, and there's a few reasons for that. I'll go into them real quickly. As of this writing, the only legal method, not under current court challenge, is lethal injection. And there are companies which produce the drugs, apparently a 3-drug cocktail required for a lethal injection, and the companies that produce those drugs have a moral objection to the death penalty, so they are not providing those drugs to the South Carolina Department of Corrections to perform, again, that punishment. So there's that reason. But the biggest reason, I think, certainly looking at this case and looking at all the various criminal prosecutions currently falling down around Alec Murdaugh, or surrounding Alec Murdaugh, rather. The murder case may be falling down. We'll see about that in a couple of weeks. But certainly when you look at the other prosecutions against Alec Murdaugh, particularly the financial crimes investigation, he is currently facing 99 charges, people. 99. That sounds like a Bueller joke there. 99, but massive charges. And if convicted on all of those counts, Alec Murdaugh is staring down 928 years behind bars. So again, we said a long time ago on this show that the prosecution was playing with house money as it related to the sentencing for Alec Murdaugh. And so 928 years on those financial crimes, certainly an indication of why they may not have opted to go for the death penalty. So again, that was the first big story on the Murdaugh saga. Let's take a look now at one of the other issues we covered. So the other big Murdaugh news this week was the escalation of the Russell Lafitte appeal. Now, if you followed this case, Russell Lafitte, the disgraced banker, now convicted fraudster, who 51-year-old former president of Palmetto State Bank, he was the guy who made all the financial moves for Alec Murdaugh, according to federal prosecutors, who laid out in chapter and verse just a damning case against Russell Lafitte. I went into that trial thinking that the prosecutors had a very high bar. And I also went into that trial thinking that Russell Lafitte's defense team had some very ample opportunities in front of them to prove a broader conspiracy, in this case, one that might get their client off the hook. Guess what, folks? That did not happen. As our Director of Special Projects, Dylan Nolan, reported. Dylan was down there the entire trial, covered it gavel to gavel. That didn't happen, folks. The prosecutors came loaded for bear. Documents, witnesses, a narrative, numbers. They had everything locked down. Lafitte's lawyers did not prove that broader conspiracy either. And so when this thing went to the jury, everyone assumed it was going to be a pretty instantaneous guilty verdict on all 6 counts against, again, Lafitte facing bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and multiple counts of misapplying bank funds. I fully expected him to be found guilty on all those crimes immediately. Obviously, he was ultimately, but, and here's the key but, that process had a bit of a hiccup. Some 11th hour jury moves by U.S. District Court Judge Richard Gergel came under fire, not only as they happened, but several weeks later when Lafitte's attorneys filed a motion for a new trial. We talked about that. We've covered that. That motion zeroed in on those jurors, including one of whom who claimed to have been pressured again in an attempt to get them to change their vote. That juror was dismissed. One other juror was dismissed, who apparently was leaning toward not convicting Russell Lafitte. What happened in that jury room? We don't know. But this week, Lafitte's attorneys filed a new supplemental brief to their motion for a new trial in which they revealed that they have 2 affidavits from members of that jury detailing the chaos that went on in that jury room. What do those affidavits say? We don't know yet. They're currently under seal. Obviously, an attempt to protect the identity of those 2 jurors. But we are told that those 2 affidavits will paint a damning picture, an incriminating picture of a violation of Lafitte's constitutional rights. Because here's the thing, folks. I believe he's guilty of sin. I think the trial proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty of sin. But in this country, you get to take your case to a jury. And they have to unanimously agree that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there's any shenanigans, chicanery, hijinks with the jury, guess what? That is grounds, legitimate grounds, for a new trial. Now, also this week, attorneys in the office of Adair Ford Burris, the U.S. Attorney for the state of South Carolina, they submitted their response to Lafitte's motion for a new trial. A 56-page document, folks. I'll boil it down pretty simply. It wasn't that impressive of a document. They did a great job during the trial, but basically they just, rehashed the transcript of this court case and said, "Oh, we think the judge acted within his discretion." It was a very weak argument from my perspective, anyway. Reading that massive document dealing with the juror shift there at the 11th hour, and again, it's. I want to be clear here. I'm not faulting Judge Richard Gergel. Certainly not faulting the prosecutors. They did an absolutely amazing job during that trial. So no blame on either party. I think Gergel was simply placed in an untenable situation. Had one juror claiming they were being bullied. One juror said they needed new medication. And we had this time crush because, again, this was happening on November 22nd of this year, 2 days before Thanksgiving. Everybody's trying to get out of there, get back to Thanksgiving. But again, just because you're on a time crunch, folks, that's not an excuse to violate somebody's constitutional rights. And in this case, again, it seemed incredibly cut and dried. And I have every confidence that if we have a new trial, which we could be headed toward for Russell Lafitte, I don't see any way he's not found guilty on these counts. And again, it'd be bad to waste all that money and have to go through all that again. But in this situation, I don't see any other option. I just don't see any other option, folks, because, again, no matter what you think of the defendant, no matter what you think of the case, that jury process is sacred. It's absolutely sacred. And if there is any indication that a juror who was inclined to go one way, and in fact, we're told one of these affidavits indicates as many as 5 jurors were initially leaning toward acquitting Russell Lafitte. I don't know what trial they watched. Clearly, one of those must have been one of the ones who was sleeping during the trial. Not sure what trial they watched, but anyway, be it as it may, they've got that right. And Lafitte has that right for them to find him that way, find him not guilty. And was that constitutional right violated in this case? We'll find out. No news yet on a hearing related to these various Lafitte-related motions, but keep it tuned to FITSNews. As soon as we know something, we'll let you know about it. Some other Murdaugh news I want to talk about today. Reinforcements are coming to the office of Attorney General Alan Wilson. And I'm talking about John Meadors. We reported on this heading into the weekend, heading into the Christmas weekend, so I don't know how many folks are going to be picking up on it, but this is actually a pretty big deal, one that we're hoping people will pay close attention to. Creighton Waters, the lead prosecutor in the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson, he's done a phenomenal job up to this point, going toe-to-toe with Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, two of the best criminal attorneys there are, who, by the way, after a very difficult and rocky start to this case, those guys have found their stride, folks. Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin are feeling it. They've been driving this narrative. They've been poking serious holes in the prosecution's case, really found their stride as this case reaches its most pivotal point here ahead of the double homicide trial, excuse me, down there in Walterboro. But clearly the AG's office reading the tea leaves here. Clearly they're recognizing that they need some help. And again, not because Waters hasn't done a good job, just the hand he's been dealt, particularly issues with some of the key forensic evidence. So the decision was made, Attorney General Alan Wilson, bringing in one of his former staffers, a guy who spent decades in the South Carolina 5th Judicial Circuit, Kershaw, Richland counties, prosecuted over 100 murder trials. By the way, that's over 100 more than Creighton Waters has prosecuted. Also, nearly 30 years of experience as a prosecutor. So John Meadors is his name, attorney with McWhorter, Bellinger and Associates. He will be joining the Attorney General's office for this trial, but I'm told it's not just a Murdaugh situation. This isn't a ringer being brought in just for this one trial. I'm told Meadors will actually stay at the AG's office, and once this trial is over, we'll be assisting them with a wide range of various prosecutorial initiatives. So we'll keep an eye on that. How does that impact the trial? We will see, but John Meadors will be at the table with Creighton Waters as this trial moves forward, as we prepare for that big 3-week proceedings down there in Colleton County. Speaking of which, FITSNews team was down in Walterboro this week. We spent a bunch of time down there with the local officials, particularly the clerk of court down there, Becky Hill. Had an amazing visit with them. Just wonderful people there. They're getting ready for this trial. We're going to have a lot of coverage on how they're getting ready, which should be pertinent for those of you who are going to be following this case very closely. We'll have a lot of information, not only on what our plans are for covering it, but what the city of Walterboro's plans are for this massive influx of media and attention accompanying this. Again, some are already calling it the trial of the century in South Carolina. We'll see. It's certainly the biggest trial we've ever covered, and I'm really excited about our plans for bringing it to you here on FITSNews. So keep it tuned to us for the latest on the Murdaughs. We've been the tip of the spear on this story. I've said it from the very beginning. Count on us to continue to provide the very best coverage of this story as it moves toward a critical climax in Walterboro. All right, so one of the other big stories that we covered this week, the Upstate Stalker. Now, this is an unknown individual or individuals bombarding, at this point, dozens of women in the South Carolina upstate, most of them business owners, most of them who know each other, who are connected with each other up there in the Greenville and Spartanburg areas, bombarding them with obscene, graphic, demeaning, and in some cases, threatening messages. Now, the women who are at the heart of this story spoke with us extensively this week on a visit up to Greer, South Carolina. We're going to have a much bigger story on that coming next week, or in the coming weeks at any rate. But I wanted to just get a quick clip from this interview because it was incredibly compelling. We spoke with 9 different women who've been targeted by this, again, unknown upstate text stalker who has infiltrated their social media accounts, who has been stalking their activity online. Will this person escalate? And what happens if they target a woman at a particularly vulnerable, weak moment? We spoke with these 9 women about their concerns related to this story. Here's an excerpt from that interview.
I just got my first round of text messages November of this year, 2022. I've only received 3 rounds or 3 weeks worth. They would come Monday or Tuesday of each week for 3 weeks. The first week, I thought it was just somebody that I had known in the past that had my phone number. My phone number's been the same for 15 years, so for the police to suggest that I change my phone number, no thank you. And then I got the second round, and that was when I shared it with a personal trainer friend. I'm a personal trainer, and she said, I've been getting those same text messages too. And so we just kind of laughed it off. She's been getting them since August. She couldn't be here today. She's in Illinois with family. And then week 3, I said, this is enough. And then I posted in Greenville Young Professionals and All Things Greenville to see if anybody else had been receiving them. And holy guacamole. It is incredible the amount of women who have came forward and said, we have been getting these messages too, in some cases for multiple years, a lot of cases just this year. But we can tell the same pattern, the same verbiage, recycled insults. So the only thing that he or she kind of changes is to let us know that this message is specifically for you. So I was watching what you did. So here's your recycled insult. Also, whatever it is that have fun at the beach if they saw you doing something. So that's the scary part, is that he's watching what we're doing. And who knows if we've been sitting next to him in a coffee shop or, whatever. We have no idea. So that's kind of where we are right now.
All right, so that was Ashley Benson. Now, she's the upstate businesswoman whose Facebook post got this entire story going, attracted our attention, and which honestly brought a lot of these women together who were being targeted by this upstate stalker. Look for much more from Ashley and from the 8 other women that we interviewed in Greer, South Carolina this week in a coming story and video on the Upstate Text Stalker. All right, so another interview we did this week related to the Cheer Incorporated scandal, particularly the latest lawsuit out of the state of Ohio. Now, our most recent episode of Cheer Incorporated, the podcast, focused on this story, and our director of special projects, Dylan Nolan, did an amazing write-up of this Ohio lawsuit. But we wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And I sat down this week with Amy Gaffney, a top employment and tort lawyer based out of Charleston, South Carolina. Amy is working on that Ohio case. She's one of the attorneys of record in that case. She's also assisting attorneys with the Strom Law Firm here in Columbia, South Carolina, on several of the other cases related to the Cheer Incorporated saga. But in that interview, I asked Amy several questions, but one of the questions I asked her revolved around the lax oversight, the failed oversight amongst the competitive cheer regulatory agencies. And specifically, I asked her how the 2 individuals accused of rape in this Ohio case, of literally giving illicit substances to an underage athlete and then sexually assaulting them, according to the complaint. Why are these individuals not on the restricted list maintained by the U.S. All-Star Federation, one of these so-called oversight safety agencies? And her answer, I believe, got to the very core of this case and the very core of the alleged conspiracy that's outlined in these lawsuits. Here's a clip from that conversation with Amy Gaffney.
We talk about the notion of accountability within an industry and some of the regulators in this industry that over the course of years have failed to hold people accountable. As we sit here and talk today, the 2 named defendants in this suit, Hale and Davis, they're not on the ineligible list maintained by USASF. How do you explain that?
It's inexplicable. In the employment arena, we frequently will say, you're not on notice that you've got a bad egg until they do something bad. And from that point, you as the employer or you as the controlling authority need to be taking steps to curtail their ability to do bad. That's your role. So it is, I don't understand how those gentlemen could not still be limited. What more notice would you need than what's been alleged? So again, to be able to explain how that's happening, I don't know, but it would sure seem that there's sufficient information out there that should alert someone in a controlling position that that some safeguards need to be put in place, like being placed on a do not hire list. Mm-hmm. In the absence of that, those folks are free to go to another state, go to another venue, whatever, without any sort of limitation.
All right, to listen to that full conversation with Amy Gaffney, check out the very latest episode of Cheer Incorporated, available on Apple and Spotify. We're drawn to the end of our first season of Cheer Inc. We'll be back after the Murdaugh trial with the second season of Cheer Incorporated. But again, help us, like it, review it, share it, most importantly, but listen. And again, that story just continues to mushroom. The response from the defendants continues to escalate. More states, more defendants, more victims, more survivors. Count on FITSNews to continue to follow it to its conclusion. So another story we covered this week involved the issue of sextortion. Again, that's when folks coerce individuals to send them explicit pictures and then blackmail them, oftentimes from a catfishing model where it's someone who's not who they claim to be or anything like who they claim to be, eliciting these images and then blackmailing the senders. Now, in a warning letter issued by the FBI earlier this year, it indicated that the top targets for these sextortion scams, 14 to 17-year-old boys, because, I mean, come on, I was a 14 to 17-year-old boy. I mean, yeah, I can see why that's the case. But this story took a very serious turn earlier this year. That's when Gavin Guffey, the son of newly elected State Representative Brandon Guffey, took his own life in connection with one of these scams. We interviewed Brandon Guffey here in the studio this week about his experience and his ongoing quest not only for justice in the case of his late son, but also his efforts as a state legislator to keep this from happening to other individuals. Here's an excerpt from that conversation.
July 27th of this year, right after I had a runoff in my primary, my son committed suicide. And
Gavin.
yes, my son Gavin Guffey, just graduated high school, about to start college. And he was at the point in his life, he had just come back from a Christian camp, announced publicly on social media, which is not common for teens, how he had Jesus in his heart, and his life was so much better. But he was diagnosed with COVID, so he was on quarantine and kind of stuck in his room. On the final day of quarantine, I'd come in from a local York County delegation meeting and was speaking with other political people around the county about the issues. So I didn't come in until about 1 o'clock. And I was laying in the bed just kind of replying to some emails. And at 1:30, he walked out of his room. And I thought it was odd because it was quiet, and I walked up to go check on him. And he ended up killing himself at that time. And come find out what happened was he was being extorted, being blackmailed. And that's something, there's still an ongoing investigation, so I'm careful about how much I can give. But I can tell you that it's given me a passion. I tell people, you know, sometimes God has to give you a Goliath to bring out the David in you. Prior to this in politics, everything was things that I still view as important. I'm a big term limits person. That's something I've always ran on. I'm a big pro-life person. I think I might be the only person to ever run for county council on a pro-life platform. But whenever something like this happens, all of those things, while important, are not nearly as important as what I'm seeing happen right now with this sextortion. And no one talks about it. The people that survive it are too ashamed to say anything about it. We're seeing a rise in suicide across this country, and we're seeing suicide without suicide notes. I believe a lot of that is linked to the sextortion. So what people do is they pretend, like in my son's case, he's about to go off to college. This girl contacts him that is in college, and they start chatting, and all of a sudden she sends over some pictures and some compromising videos, and you know, he's thinking that this is a girl he's about to meet, and he decides he's going to send some pictures. And as soon as he does, they come back and start blackmailing him for money. And it's hard to say, but I do believe that if I wasn't in politics, I believe that my son might have approached it differently. But we had a very hard-fought campaign, and I constantly told them I didn't have much to give them in life, but what I did have was a name, and for them not to ruin it. And I think a lot of what I said, the life lessons of man up instead of showing your emotions and being vulnerable, I think all of that just kind of come in on them at one time. And what I found... You
sound like you're blaming yourself a little bit.
Well, there is some blame. I don't think that you can look at improving... Now, I don't blame myself, but you cannot retrospectively look at something and truly make a change without seeing how you could have changed. There's hundreds of things that I could have done different. I say that I was a great father. That doesn't mean I couldn't have been better. And And those are things that are making me a better father with my other two boys. You know, my wife only seen me cry prior to this maybe 3 times in our entire marriage. Once whenever my son was born, once whenever we were having some marital issues, and then once whenever my son died. And that's because I was always under the mindset that men don't cry.
Yeah.
You man up and you get over it. And as soon as he committed suicide, the first thing I'm thinking is that I have ruined him because he wasn't able to share emotions. Since then, I've learned it's a lot deeper than that. Some of the statistics on suicide, more than half of them are impulsive. The one that shocked me the most, that is within 20 minutes of someone making the decision and committing the act, that they attempt suicide. Wow. More than 90% are unsuccessful unless there is a weapon involved. And if there is a gun involved, that time period goes down to 3 minutes. And in my son's case, that's about how long it was. And I'm typically a person that keeps weapons locked up. It was just a perfect storm of why the weapon was not locked up at that time. It was put up into a kind of a secretive high place to where my 4-year-old couldn't get to it. But everything just happened, like I said, in a perfect storm. Within that 24 hours, he was able to get that weapon and chose to end his life instead of speaking with me.
I want to thank Representative Guffey for coming into our studios and sharing that incredibly difficult story. Also, I want to thank him for his work on this issue. Look for that full interview on FITSNews early next week as we continue to track this epidemic of sextortion here in South Carolina and beyond. All right, that's a wrap for this week's edition of the Weekend Review. Thanks for checking in. Merry Christmas. It's Christmas weekend. Our gift to you, obviously, if you've checked out the site lately, a brand new FITSNews. Spiffy, I'm thinking, right? Most people seem to dig it, but a brand new look. We've been working very hard on that. A lot of people worked incredibly hard on that site. Very proud of everybody for the work they put into it. Send us your feedback, though. We want to know if you like it. And obviously, we are just rolling this thing out. We're just learning all the things it can do. So be on the lookout for a lot of new content from FITSNews as we explore this new website that we built with you, our audience. But one quick point, as we head into Christmas, as we start thinking about things that matter, it's not just the package, folks. It's what's inside. As you open those presents, I want you to think about that, because a nice spiffy website doesn't mean anything unless you've got something on it that matters. And on that point this week, our research director, Jen Wood, penned probably the most compelling thing we've ever published. And it's the story of Terry Lewis, a low-country woman who was beaten, burned nearly to death at first. She later died as a result of those injuries by an abusive husband, now staring down murder charges. But that case, which Jen Wood told in excruciating detail, graphic detail, but again, compelling, gripping, inspiring detail when you think about it, when you read that story. Again, just that's why we do what we do, folks, stories like that. So I want to thank Jen Wood not only for the amazing work she does as our top researcher, as the brains of our Murdaugh operation and the driving force of the Cheering podcast, but for stepping into that role as a lead reporter on one of the most, again, compelling stories we've ever told on FITSNews. If you want to support us in that effort, please subscribe. Again, like us, share us. But again, we're grateful for that support because it helps us tell those stories, the stories that too often the mainstream media here just won't tell. But thank you for that. As we head into this Christmas break, again, Merry Christmas from all of us at FITSNews. We wish you and yours the best, and we will catch you next week.